All right, so folks, it's time now for the premiere presentation from the next Pando Days School, which is the University of Southern California. Their project takes place in El Sereno in East LA, and it's titled Test Plot Elephant Hill. Professor Jen Toy is the team lead. And Jen, I understand Elephant Hill is just one of 7 test plots where you and colleagues from USC are digging in across the county on, what was once neglected land. Your aim, I'm told, is to create viable ecosystems that are managed by local communities. And that sounds really cool. Would love to learn more about the project.
Thanks, Matthew. We're thrilled to be here, and this is the first test plot that's participating in Pando Day. So it's been really great to think about how to tell the story. The way that we're going to be presenting is actually I'm going to turn it over to my 10 students, and each of them will be presenting a few slides, which we've practiced down to the minute. So I will go ahead and share my screen and ask that my students all unmute yourselves. And then when you're done speaking, you can mute yourself again.
So on a recent visit, the test plot team walked up the steep slopes of Elephant Hill following off-road ATV tracks and game trails left by coyotes. We heard the neighborhood roosters and watched hawks soar above. The warm breeze was blowing from the east. We tried to listen for what the land wants to be. Our project is number 6 in a series of experimental community-driven habitat restoration projects in LA called Test Plot. It came about because a few local neighbors contacted Jen, our professor, through Instagram. They had been following the other test plot and thought that we could try something similar at Elephant Hill, a community that desperately needs open space. As a class of 10 students, from a college freshman to a PhD candidate, we worked with these neighbors to test methods of habitat restoration and stewardship. One of Jen's passions as a teacher is to introduce students to a way of designing that is hands-on and an accumulation of work over time. She also wants students to know how to plant a plant before they graduate. So before we introduce you to the site and community, we ask you to consider this statement. Our project is a protest against shiny new projects. Instead, we ask, what if we focused on taking care of the people and the wild spaces, public spaces that we have?
This is Elephant Hill, or Ochunga, meaning land of the wild rose. Elephant Hill is referred to by locals as the heavens and is the largest remaining open space in Northeast LA at 110 acres. People have been passionately fighting in groups like Save Elephant Hill to preserve this land for decades. Elephant Hill is a predominantly Latino neighborhood of El Sereno. Most people in the area have a high school education level. A number I want to focus on is the 8,000 children in El Sereno. With wilderness becoming more of a luxury, it is important for these children to have access to nature. Elephant Hill is crucial for preserving biodiversity in the area. The land is part of the Arroyo Seco habitat corridor and is home to valuable habitats like coastal sage scrub and oak walnut woodlands. Natural land is scarce in East LA. Aldo Leopold said, "There are some who can live without wild things and some who cannot." We are at risk of having a third category of people for whom this decision is not available.
From the scale of the individual to the community to society, our land-based well-being is challenged by systemic devaluation of care, underinvestment in long-term stewardship, and disconnection from indigenous ways of knowing and relating to land. Today, these systemic barriers inequitably impair communities' capacities to self-realize their co-management of shared land. At Elephant Hill, certain human-earth relationalities pose challenges to the long-term care of this place. Generally, the historical ecologies have been dumped upon, degraded, outcompeted, and parcelized. The care that maintained this place has been largely forgotten. Community pushback against the degradation of Elephant Hill has both stemmed from and laid seed for re-indigenized relationalities with the land. Through our test plot at Elephant Hill, we endeavored to help ritualize these reciprocal pathways of care and connection to land.
The most heartwarming opportunity to do this has come from the origins of the project, a handful of passionate neighbors who invited us to help restore Elephant Hill. They had already begun planting native plants, and we saw this as an opportunity to deepen their relationship to other neighbors, environmental partners, and create a central restoration site that could become a community space. We've also built upon work started by the activists from the Black Warner Coalition, the El Sereno Community Land Trust, and Save Elephant Hill to protect and preserve land from development. In 2015, the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, the local conservation agency, purchased 5 acres from the city of LA to permanently protect this land and create a walking trail. However, 7 years later, the community is still waiting for the trail. We got permission from MRCA to plant on their 5 acres as a way to start bringing positive programming to the site and encourage MRCA to complete the trail.
Solutions. The first strategy was to be very intentional about building relationships. Not only did we partner with MRCA for approval to start work on the site, but a number of organizations from California Native Plant Society on came together on planning day to make this vision a reality and ensure everything ran smoothly. This outreach allowed us to foster new, lasting relationships that can benefit future test plots and generate more collaboration. Before we began planting at Elephant Hill, we wanted to respectfully acknowledge the culture of the Tongva tribe. Tina Calderon is a culture bearer of the Tongva. She asked the land for permission and helped us make peace and reciprocity with the plot through a tobacco offering before we began our research. On all of our plant labels, we included Tongva plant names.
In mapping the landscape, we spent a lot of time over the course of several site visits to document and study the topography, views, connections, and patterns of use, eventually creating these collages to illustrate various perspectives of the land. Each perspective varied in focus, from understanding the flow of water to the rampant waste found and the quality of the soil. The next step in our study was mapping the contours of the test plot. By mapping the slopes, we can better understand movement of water throughout the site, especially important in a low water access area. Preparing the site for planting required a specific method due to the lack of water access. In this case, solarization was the most practical. In order to kill the underlying seed bank lying below our plot, we raised the soil temps by laying plastic sheeting and to create a fresh slate for the initial planting. In a multi-year successional planting strategy, we begin with plants that adapt easiest to the bare conditions. In the next year, we'll overseed with grasses and wildflowers. Then by the 3rd year, we'll add in these target species.
We now invite you to watch this short film on planting day. Because the Zoom video sharing can be tricky if the quality is not good for you, there's a link in the chat for you to follow along now or later.
Ochud,
Is it good now?
California Wild Rose. Ochunga, Place of the Wild Rose. Ochunga, Ochunga.
You know, anytime you restore a community back to like what its native plant, it's a process. So this is a good first step. This is a great first step. This is the California lilac. Grows up and down the coast and in some of the valleys. Keystone species, I think supports 300 individual species. We picked this planting location because there's a lot of really great native plants around here that are established, that are happy. Good soil, it seems like. Nice little basin, good drainage. I think it's going to do well. I feel good. So I'm gonna, that's it, and then you're gonna push it back in, push the soil back in there. There you go. I've just been dropping all this stuff. That's nature too. And you know what? We're also part of nature. I know, huh? Because we live in nature, we work with nature. We could eventually do more of what we're doing here on other parts of the hill, to have more green space for Angelinos and people here in the city. Yeah. There we go.
With our first community planting day behind us, we are already able to measure our impact by numbers. More than 70 community volunteers showed up to plant 240 plants across our 5,000 square foot site. Moving forward, it is important to us that we continue to evaluate and measure the impact of the plot on the human and non-human community. 2 test plot students will monitor plant soil and health, biodiversity, and the labor inputs for the next year.
With these numbers, we have now built a strong community of people that are not only interested in test plotting, but want to guarantee its success. We have the context of all the 70 participants present on Planting Day and have talked to them and discussed how they will remain involved in future events. Finally, the new plot is now a community public space for residents to learn about native plants and to exchange knowledge about test plot and its means. It was an amazing day in which people met their community and neighbors, made new friends, and learned new skills. A parent brought their young child who had been talking about the event all week because he just loves digging so much.
After setting up the plot, it's time to think about the next steps to keep this project alive. Maintaining the plot and the plants takes more time than you might think. There's weeding, mulching, and watering that needs to happen weekly. This is why we plan to set up a neighborhood Facebook group to make a weekly schedule so that the plot gets the care it needs. Next, we're going to use social media to find new volunteers in the area. Also, we'd like to install a community bulletin board where we can post about ways to get involved and advertise for upcoming events.
Continued programming of the test plot will be key so that a broader range of residents can get involved. During our planting day, we received a lot of exciting feedback from community members about the types of activities and events they would like to see at the plot and at Elephant Hill in the future. These activities include native plant dye workshops and art classes, native plant tours, and bird watching. We hope our test plot can become a place where local families can bring their children to learn about native plant restoration and maintenance. Community members also told us they want to see the test plot serving as a local hub and gathering place. To this end, our test plot could host guided meditation or musical performances. It could also house a dedicated space for picnicking and relaxing. We believe our test plot demonstrates the power of when Angelinos, community-based organizations, and public agencies all collectively invest in the public spaces we have. Additional support from Pando Days would enable our test plot to grow beyond our successful planting day and evolve into a long-term source of involvement and pride for Northeast LA. We invite you to invest in the valuable work of ongoing land care and community stewardship through test plot. Thank you for your time and consideration.
All right, thanks USC. It's wonderful. I love how inclusive your process was and respectful and all of the care that went into this as well. Excited to see what our panel thinks. I think I might maybe pick on Rodrigo first this time.
Great, yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I love how much you all thought about it's like before I could even ask a community related question, you thought about how this was going to be connected to the ongoing neighborhood connection and storytelling and programming to keep people involved. So you kind of have already really answered that for me. I'm curious if you could just maybe tell us a bit more about you gave a little bit of the background for choosing this site and working with the MRCA here on this land. But what were some of the other things that you considered? Did you meet with the neighbors or look into some of the cultural contexts there, for that people piece to be able to determine that this was the right test plot site for you?
Sure, I can speak to that. Yeah, I mean, for each test plot, it's been a little bit different in terms of how we engage with the community. The first couple test plots at Elysian Park and Rio de Los Angeles were really started during the pandemic. And so we kind of had the ability to take advantage of folks who could be safely outside and what were sort of itching for a place to be with community outdoors. And this one, we really wanted to make sure that there were some local stewards who were committed and willing to step up. And I think sort of we touched on it in the presentation, but you know, the fact that they had reached out, they had already been doing some kind of, they were calling it guerrilla gardening. We felt like was a really good indication that at least there was a sort of group of community leaders that could be the ongoing caretakers and would be committed. And then we started researching more about the community and just trying to learn as much about the history of activism. And, you know, there's a really rich and deep history of groups fighting to protect Elephant Hill, fighting gentrification, really working to deepen the relationship with the Black Walnut, which is super special to that area. And so from like a few groups of, you know, residents to all the way up to these like community organizations and sort of larger environmental orgs like Tree People and Northeast Tree, we felt like there was a really nice cross section of folks who were committed to the area and could act as partners. Because, you know, the last thing that we want to do in this type of project is come in as a group of students, academics, you know, parachute in, do our thing and leave, right? It's really about setting the foundation for the work that we do to plant the seed and then help to continue.
Thank you. Let's throw it to Alex.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the off-roading. It sounds like vehicles driving around Elephant Hill had been a problem. And I'm wondering if with the test plot you've already observed or have any anecdotal evidence of a decrease in off-roading. And as your plans progress for, you know, Elephant Hill, what sort of risk you think off-roaders might place on the ecological development?
Yeah, it's a really challenging area, you know, 110 acres, but most of it is privately owned. You look at like the map and they're all privately owned parcels. So the off-roading challenge has always been there, but it's gotten definitely worse during the pandemic. And we did a pretty intensive site selection process. And one of the reasons why we chose this site is because it's pretty steep to get down to from the top, and there's a gate. And so that's one of the challenges that the community's been facing: broken gates. People have, you know, just been sort of blowing through, and on the other side of the hill, that's why a lot of off-roading has been happening there. And so Save Elephant Hill is one of the you know, groups that has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of protecting the hill from development and promoting this idea of it as a possible restored open space for the community. And Elvianas, who's leading that, really invited us to come to try and start bringing positive programming through the test plot. So even though our site itself isn't necessarily, it hasn't been subject to off-roading, we hope that just by bringing more folks to the hill, doing other activities, getting families up there, kids up there, that will start to have an effect on, you know, other parts of the area and other entrances.
All right, thank you. Let's throw it to Mark for our last question.
Yes, I better unmute. Looking at things from a national perspective, first I want to say you already answered a question that I had when I reviewed your materials yesterday. And that was by bringing to our attention that I gotta say it right, MRCA has purchased the land, as I understand it. But what I do know about Los Angeles is sort of famous for two huge shortages. One, a shortage of parkland, the other, a shortage of housing. And you've made references several times to protect from development, but you now have a new mayor who's coming in and saying, we gotta have more housing. This is the emergency. Are there any threats that, from your perspective, that this might tip in another direction to say maybe we better look at housing for this site after all? Or is it pretty much a solid deal that it's meant to be protected for recreational purposes?
Well, the 5 acres that we've been working on is owned and managed by MRCA, and it's adjacent to 20 acres that's owned by the LA City. So at least in terms of ownership currently, it seems like it's pretty safe that it will be public land. They have a grant to build this trail, although they still haven't done it. So we're hopeful. And I mean, you raise a good point. You know, it's a tension between the need for housing and protection of open space. And I guess what I've been learning is that in this particular area of Elephant Hill, you know, there's a reason why it hasn't been developed, even though it has, you know, many private owners, and the steep slopes and topography and the sort of cost implications. Monterey Hills is a development that was the subject just across the way to a huge environmental lawsuit because they had to basically scrape the hill to build new housing on top of it, and it wasn't done correctly. And so those challenges combined with the fact that there are these sort of beautiful pockets of black walnut and oaks, which are protected trees, lead me to believe that the need for housing is there, but maybe should be focused in other areas for infill, where housing development is more appropriate.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, USC. Great work.